welcome to our book club. And we are absolutely delighted tonight to have Jess Phillips, NP, with us to talk about her third book, which I will hold up. I can't read it backwards. Everything You Really Need to Know About Politics, My Life as an MP. So I tried to grab my copies of Jess's other books to take with me. So I've got Truth to Power here, but I've lent the other one to someone and I can't remember who. So if the person is watching, please give it back. Because I like to have all three of them on the shelf, especially as they're all signed. So Jess, you've obviously had great success with the first two books, but what made you want to write this book specifically?
Well, I mean, whilst I always write about politics, it's rarely like the actual act of what I do in my daily life that I tend to write about. And people have a basic misunderstanding of exactly what the job of a Member of Parliament is. And I wanted to write about it in a fun and hopeful way. What can be quite a dry subject matter, what my actual job is. It can be very dry. Because I want to invite people into the reality of it in the hope of encouraging more people to take part in it, in whatever form, whether that's representation or just, you know, feeling that they have agency in the political system. But I have to say I'm often shocked if people do know actually what the remit of my job is. Now, people think that I am able to get them a house. People think that I am able to even directly raise any issue with Boris Johnson. Like anything I want, I could just rock up to him and just say whatever I want. And it's just not the reality of the situation that I'm in. And I think that people's expectations of members of parliament often lead to, and politics more generally, often lead to some of the disdain and the despondency with politics. But there is loads that we can do and do that people don't know about. And so I wanted to write it so that I could sort of try and tell the story of why some things get so much attention and other things don't, and why politics should be for everyone, and the reasons that it's not is often because of and it's not the fault of the public not understanding it, it's the fault of politicians and the political system basically overblowing its sense of what it can do for the sake of elections. Elections are, I mean, the worst part of democracy, because it makes people lie essentially, and it makes people promise the earth, the moon on a stick, and then that leads to despondency about what can actually be done.
Why do you think the public have so little understanding of what politics is? I know, and I'm sure the people here know from being a councillor, that I often knock on doors and people say, are you standing to be mayor, or even are you standing to be a senator or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, during the mayoral election recently in the West Midlands, loads of people kept coming into my office and being like, Jess, we just voted for you. And I thought, you didn't, because my name's not on the ballot. You definitely didn't. But I was like that, great, thanks. Look, I think that there is a basic lack of education in the country around politics and the political systems and structures. I think that is improving slightly. Young people seem more engaged than I've ever known it before in the political system, and many more people study politics in their further education now than did even when I was at school. So whether that's A-level or onto degree level. But look, I just think that there is, like, I remember when they prorogued Parliament and the Supreme Court found that found against them and said that Parliament had to be reopened and that it had been unlawful. The amount of people who got in touch with me and said, like, oh, are they going to go to prison? Who's going to go to prison for this? And it's just like a very basic misunderstanding between the difference between civil and criminal courts in our country. And I just thought, kids should be learning this stuff from a very, very early age. About the criminal justice system, about the justice system in our country, about the political system in our country. Because whenever people then go up against it or find it intervening in their lives, they're like, can you believe this? And I'm like, yeah, I know, but people don't know about it until they are either victim of it, or they try and interact with it and find it completely and utterly not what they thought it was. And so I think that, you know, a basic lack of sort of education on the matter is really, really fundamentally a problem.
I think that's not helped by the kind of view a lot of the public have of politicians, that of every level, that people don't want to engage when you try and tell them how things work. It's often quite difficult to go into that. If anyone wants to ask a question or comment on anything, just put your hand up or wave at me and I will come to you. So let me know, anyone, when you want to speak. The first thing I wanted to mention, Jess, is the first chapter of your book is called People Care About Potholes Getting Elected. I don't think I would ever have believed how obsessed the public are with either potholes, drains, bins. I haven't had a day in months where I haven't discussed bins. Which I think, like you say in the book, is quite the opposite of what people think. Like, people imagine when you're a politician, you'll spend all your time talking about, I don't know, fiscal matters or things that seem really, really important. But having said that, as obsessed with people are with potholes, they don't generally know where to go to get the potholes fixed, I find. I wondered if you wanted to sort of comment on that.
Yeah, like, you will often be swayed by big political events, and politicians lose their heads over big political events. We're currently going through one at the moment with social care, and it is as if, like, you know, this is a major thing, and sometimes there's like a scandal, or like, so in my constituency we had all of the Trojan horse, well, what were called the Trojan horse schools, which were there was an accusation made that that there was basically Islamic fundamentalists going on in schools. It was largely found not to be the case, although there were some findings of some potentially questionable things, but it caused this, what you would think as a politician, this massive ruction, where, you know, it was like accusations of racism, some of them to be completely founded, but, like, you know, you would think that everybody in that bit of my constituency where those schools were like obsessed with this. If you were to listen to the noise that was in Parliament, if they listened to the noise even that was on the council, or listen to what you were reading in your local and national media at the time. So I thought, right, I'm going to go out and knock on doors. I'm going to all these public meetings, there's people shouting and angry, and I'm attending all of that. And then, so I thought, I'm going to go and knock on doors in the areas that, you know, that these schools serve. And not one person mentioned it to me. They were saying things like, well, you know, could I just get an extra bin because it's just not big enough, my bin, or like, you know, I haven't got a parking space, there's not enough room to park on the street, I can never get out. You know, they were talking about the things that genuinely the public, and we undermine this as if it, and we call it pavement politics. We undermine the fact that when people talk to us about potholes, and when people talk to us about their bins, and when people talk to us about dog shit, and antisocial behaviour on the estate, what we you know, it's very often that people can think that is sort of very pedestrian and not understanding about politics. But the way that I experience that is that people really give a shit about where they live. And people really, really give a toss about the environment in its biggest sense, in their area. People are very parochial about the place that they live, and that could just be literally the square footage outside their house. And we don't trouble ourselves with that in Westminster very often. This idea of the sense of feeling happy in the place where you are. Look, I think that the public care about it because it's the thing that they come across. What I think that is irritating, I think, sometimes for members of Parliament, is that people misunderstand that lots of these issues are council issues. I had a member of Parliament once say to me, it was a Labour member of Parliament, although they're not a Labour member of Parliament now, said to me once, oh, you know, I just give all that to my councillors. I don't even answer that casework. And I just thought, well, you're just basically saying you don't care about the things that the people where you live, well, maybe you don't live there, about where you represent care about. And I just get, you know, these are council matters, no doubt about it, But people, they don't give a toss what title you have before your name or after, or which building it is you work in. You're there, they elected you, they voted for you, they want you to sort out their shit. And we don't, and sometimes we use that to belittle the public. I remember one time, this is it's both tragic and charming story, because genuinely most people in my constituency don't realise that I'm not in charge of bins. One time I'd been called out to a local women's centre by a very, very exasperated support worker who tried every angle to get someone to help, and she just came to me. It wasn't in my constituency. The person involved wasn't my constituent, and she just was like, I've hit the wall, Jess. I don't know what to do to keep this woman safe. It was a young woman. She had been sexually exploited for about 7 years. She was 23 years old. She had been in and out of the criminal justice system for one reason or another. She was like, can you come? I can't get the police to respond. So I turn up. It's like 9 o'clock at night at this local women's centre, and this young woman, and I rang the police. I can ring the chief of police, so I did that, and they duly said that they'd send someone out to interview her. She's literally bleeding from a gang rape that she had suffered. And she's saying to me, this young woman, really sorry, your work, get home to your family. I don't want you to be wasting time with me. This isn't your job. And I just turned around to her and I said, look, this is actually my job. And don't worry, people moan at me about their bins. And she just looked up, this woman literally beaten black and blue, looked up and said to me, why would people come to you about the bins? That's the council. And I immediately on the spot was like, would you like a job in my office? This is like, most people don't know that. And this woman in this traumatic moment could identify this this thing. But it's because politicians claim to have cleaned up areas. That's the reason people think that, because politicians like me stand on streets and say that, doing litter picks, saying thanks, we cleaned up the area, because we want the accolade, but then we moan when it comes with work.
Yeah, that's it exactly, isn't it? I
think we lie to people. That's why.
You don't, Jess.
I mean, try not to, but we don't. I don't say on my leaflet, we cleaned up the area with the help of the council. Brought to you by Birmingham City Council.
Well, yeah, I think it's what I think the story you just told there. Lots of people will obviously know that previous to being an MP, you worked for Women's Aid, and I think it's very noticeable that now we've got somebody in your job who knows what they're talking about, and for me, having worked in a similar sector, that's really quite refreshing, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about domestic abuse. Do you think there's a lot of talk about career politicians and whether it's a good thing to have people that want to be politicians when they're 16, or like yourself? I know you say in the book that someone rang and said, do you want to stand for election, and you just yelled at your husband, should I do it? Like you were talking about whether you should go out for dinner that night or something. Do you think that kind of attitude you had about going to Parliament, do you think that's an asset, or do you think?
Yeah, I think that if it's a good thing. Look, I think it's an asset that I had the job that I had, and I think it's an asset that that shouting upstairs to my husband rather than spending my entire life plotting and planning to become a member of Parliament means that I don't have, I approached it with the reverence I think it continues to deserve, and that I'm not overwhelmed by the reverential nature of the hierarchical system that is the Parliament in our country, and or any hierarchy. I mean, when I was on the local council, I mean, it's like you're treated like a god by some communities. The amount of weddings I get invited to, and then like you'll be put on the stage next to the bride, and then you have to turn to the bride and say, what's your name? Like, you don't even know your bloody name. Why am I at this bloody wedding? You get treated like C-3PO in Star Wars sometimes. And so you have to, I think, having an ability to try and downplay the reverence sometimes is an asset. But the whole thing about career politicians is often peddled by people who are career politicians and have done nothing but try and attack the establishment in order to get into politics. So it's sort of toxic. But I don't believe that there is, I don't believe that the House of Commons it is serviced by having anything that is a monolith. Like, I don't think it would be good if all people were like me. I don't think, I think that it's really, really important to have some people who have worked on the front line, who have been nurses, doctors, teachers, who have been care workers, who have been all of those sorts. I think that's really, really important. But you also do need, for want of a better word, like, you know, you sort of policy poindexters that you know, everybody has a role. And there are people who I work alongside whose jobs were being civil servants in government departments, who understand policy and the procedures of legislation way better than I do, but they don't understand how it hits the front line the way that I do. And so you need both those sorts of people. And so I'm always loath to say, to be like anti the idea of someone being a special advisor, working in a government department, then becoming a member of parliament. It's just a too easy a win to be just like fundamentally anti that. And I think you need heart, passion, fire and brimstone as much as you need somebody who likes reading policy papers. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with them, but there are lots of people here who like that, and I am forever grateful that there are lots of people here who like that. What pisses me off about Parliament is the reverence system that comes for certain jobs prior to being here. And so there is a codified way that we speak about people depending on their previous life experience. If they were a soldier, you say gallant friend, and like I'm meant to know what everybody's job was before. Like I don't know if you're gallant or not. I don't know if you've served in the armed forces. And also, learned friend means you are you're a lawyer before you were here, because that obviously is. I mean, we play lawyer or not lawyer because that's the most common thing most people were before they were here, is a lawyer. But there's no, you know, so and these are two job roles largely, and the reason that terminology comes from the olden days, they are largely job roles held by men. But where's the terminology like caring friend for somebody who's been a support worker or a carer or run a caring organisation? There is no terminology for, like, you know, understands the, you know, lived on benefits friend, like, you know what I mean? There is no, you know, a beneficial friend, we could call them. But and that annoys me, the idea that certain pathways to here have a certain status in the House of Commons, and that pisses me off.
Do you think Parliament would be better if it got rid of all the kind of pomp and ceremony, all the kind of bowing, saying aye instead of I's the right answer yes? Do you think Parliament is the worst for having that kind of?
I think it puts people off,
Yeah.
but also people also in the public like it. You know, there's always this thing about how, and it often gets spun as a sort of feminist issue, the sort of shouty nature of the House of Commons and and everybody hates the Arbu sucks element of Prime Minister's Question Time. The public don't hate it. The public like it. That's why it's the only bit that they actually watch. Yeah. So I think that we have to be really, really, really careful about, and the public likes some of the pomp and ceremony about it. I don't like it. I don't like bowing. I was raised never to bow to anybody. Like, literally nobody is more important than you. Not that you're important, that you're equally important. Like, you're nobody's servant. And the, you know, so I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I have to bow my head and things without. I wouldn't mind it if it was my choice. I will show reverence and bow my head and make those sorts of gestures when I feel it in my heart, because I often feel it. Today I sat with two mothers whose daughters had been murdered in domestic killings, and you know, they deserve the gesture of my head being bowed to their whilst they give their testimony. They deserve that, and it not even deserved. Like, I felt it. I chose to do it. I don't like being told I have to bow because somebody's got some gold medal or not. I don't like that element to Parliament, but it is what it is. It's a sideshow, actually. I don't like the language you can and can't use. I don't like. I find that some of that is irritating. I don't know why you can't say people's names. I'd much rather they said, well, as Jess said, rather than the member for Birmingham Yardley. Also, some of the constituencies are unannounceable. Like I don't want to mangle beautiful Welsh place names. and so you end up just saying the honourable member. And and also, how am I meant to know where people are from? Like, I can't learn there's 650 constituencies. I can't learn everybody's name, let alone, like, remember the 3 different place names in their constituency. Yvette Cooper, I always get it wrong, her constituent. Normanton, Pontefract, Castleford. And every single time I say it, I have to go like that. Is it this one? And all the Sheffields, I get them mixed up. So, yeah, I think some of that needs to go. Stupid.
Jimmy, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I have a quite kind of basic question. Jess just said that there are people who used to be soldiers, used to work in the government organizations. But I thought in those jobs, they cannot stand for public office, right? So from when they switch from that job to public office, when do they resign?
You have to leave your job. To stand in the election, you can't be a serving soldier, I believe, and you can't join a political party. So I think the good example is Dan Jarvis on the Labour benches. In order to stand in the by-election, he hadn't been like a Labour member for the sort of qualifying period that you would normally expect someone who was going to stand for selection. But the reason he hadn't was because he had left the armed forces, joined the Labour Party, because he wasn't allowed to be part of that. So allowances are obviously made. I'm not here to criticise that. I would defend it, in fact. But yeah, you're not allowed to. So Keir Starmer is another good example. Keir Starmer was in a politically restricted role as the DPP, rightly so, that should be politically restricted. So yes, in order to stand to be a candidate, he had to resign his job. So usually people resign at least 6 months before. Now, lots of the soldiers who were in Parliament have finished serving many years before, actually. So, most of the stuff that you will have been hearing in the last week about Afghanistan, lots and lots of people who served in Afghanistan, the last time they served was 7-8 years ago, and they were elected like 5 years ago. So it's not, usually people have quite a clear period in between.
But isn't it quite kind of risky if you leave your government job and then run for election, then you don't get elected? Then you kind of...
It's absolutely, but so speaks anyone standing for election. So, I mean, the risk is there for everybody, and because most people really, in reality, apart from maybe if you're a paper candidate who gets elected by accident, which happens loads in snap general elections, people are like, shit, I'm a member of Parliament. And in the 1997 Labour landslide election victory, there were just loads of people who were just like, oh God, I mean, I'm due at work on Monday. Like, I can't be a member of Parliament. I didn't expect to be elected in, in Dorset. It's like, what? That's the same for everybody. I mean, I basically I didn't quit my job, but I had to give it up for like 6 months and be on sabbatical. And for most people, that isn't available. But I suppose Women's Aid, where I was working, saw the benefit of having somebody like me elected, but I was unpaid. I didn't get paid to take that time off work. So that is the same for everybody. And it's actually really, really problematic. And it's the reason why we don't end up with loads more variety of people, because rich people can afford to do it much more easily, both afford the cost of doing it, but also they can take if you own a company or you're a stockbroker and you've got like a big share index, you can afford to take 6 months. And in the book, there's quite a lot about how we select candidates being one of the fundamental problems in politics across the board, both the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party. It's that's it. I would argue that the political party system is the main reason why we end up with a not very diverse Westminster.
Liz?
Sorry, as someone who stood in 2019 who does own her own company, I do have to stick up for us company owners at this point and point out that no, it wasn't easy taking 6 weeks off, because I was getting up.
I was thinking more people like Jacob Rees-Mogg than you, Liz. But
well, this is the problem. problem. And I mean, this is something that I'm going really frustrated with at the moment, is that we're all lumped in together. And my interests and my experience of running a business are not that of Jacob Rees-Mogg.
No.
I mean, I pay corporation tax for a start. So, you know, there's one big difference. So I suppose what I'm trying to get to is a question about, you know, how do we equalize that? Because, you know, my business interests and the business interests of the people that actually get to talk about business are poles apart. And in fact, right. You know, I've just done some research for York Law School on something that's ongoing at the moment, the Pubs Code consultation, which is complete whitewash and will mean that I lose money next year. So, you know, what can we do about that? I mean, how can we make sure
I totally agree with you. The vast majority of people, for a start off, the vast majority of people in our country are employed by SMEs and not big businesses. And yet when we talk about business, we talk about big businesses. And so, you know, even the rhetoric about shortages is all about like Nando's, like, because people have heard of Nando's and KFC not having enough chicken and McDonald's not having any milkshake. But you know, small businesses for example, in Cornwall at the moment, we're literally ringing people and saying, you don't come on your holiday because I don't know if I'm going to be able to feed you. But nobody's talking about the small hotel owner and them missing out on a customer for a week that they had booked into a hotel or a pub or whatever it is a massive, massive deficit compared to the fact that people will still go to McDonald's or just have a Coke instead of a milkshake. When we talk about business, and the Labour Party has been guilty of this for a very long time, to not make the political conversation much more about SMEs and struggling businesses and how they are the sort of backbone to the employment in our constituencies now, that big industry is not a thing that largely exists anywhere in our country anymore. And in my constituency that used to be entirely supported by the car industry but is now, all that sort of trade is in much smaller providers of components in the system. They don't get an airing anywhere near like Jaguar Land Rover do, and yet that they're employing 10 times the amount of people in reality when you add them all up. And so we have got to, you're absolutely right, we have got to do much more to give breaks, support, encouragement and policy drive to small and medium businesses, without question.
Well, I'll follow you up on that one. I've got some ideas, plenty of them.
Also, Liz, I just say, I feel like I've said this to you before. The greatest training I ever had to be a member of Parliament was working in a pub. So, working at Women's Aid helped me with the policy shit. Working in a pub is literally the greatest training for dealing with crap in Westminster and chatting with people. So
I feel like I can't not mention that Liz also has the strangest qualification in the world. Her doctorate is in Egyptian mathematics.
I mean, why not just, if you're going to do a mathematics, do one that sounds even more harder than normal mathematics?
Yeah, my mathematics came written in hieroglyphs, so I had to translate that first.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, you're like a polymath, Liz.
Yeah. She really. If anyone else wants to ask a question, please just jump in or wave or talk in the chat, or any way you want to make yourself known. Jess, one thing I think we really need to talk about for anyone that wants to get involved in politics, and you do touch on this in the book and you've talked about it lots elsewhere, is the social media element that's now a part of being a politician. I think at any level, but particularly for female MPs, the kind of harassment, the nastiness, the kind of things in your family, and you talk about that quite a lot in the book. And I think it's fair to say you always seem like you cope with that very well, but I think that must put people off coming into politics now. I don't know if you want to talk about how that's kind of how you see that.
It almost certainly does put people off politics. Almost certainly. but not at the you know, necessarily even just at the highest level, because you get so much more of it. But it puts people off saying an opinion, which is essentially politics. Like, you know, so like whether it's you're on a Facebook group and you see somebody saying you don't like footballers taking the knee, and you want to say, well, actually, I do like and express a political opinion. You probably think twice, actually, about putting your own political opinions out there in various forums, and that's the end of it that frightens me considerably more than, you know, the people in prison for threatening to kill me, because we're just stamping on people's ability to express themselves and feel comfortable in speaking in a political environment, or about political things, which I would argue is everything. Everything is political. So speaking about anything really at the moment could cop you a load of shit on social media. And I think that is dangerous and problematic. But I suppose the way and so it's not just putting people off because they don't want the abuse. It's stopping those people finding out that they would ever be put on before they're put off. Because you know, I was allowed to be a sort of like rabble rouser when I was a kid, and allowed to, like, you know, express things. Now it would be harder. It would undoubtedly be harder, and I would probably have faced some sort of backlash that then put me off being a bit of a rabble rouser. And so my thick skin would never have been created in order to allow me to cope with it now. And so that is a real worry and concern. But it's fundamentally quite dangerous for our democracy, because, you know, there are some subjects that that you worry about how to go about approaching them, and they're things that really need approaching, like really difficult things, especially in the space of violence against women and girls, that if you talk about them you will immediately be shot down from both the left and the right of politics without question. They don't say the same thing, but the effect is exactly the same. That you're saying this for, you know, because, you know, you hate certain communities, that's what the left often argue if you speak up about certain things, or the right similarly say, oh, you don't care about it when Muslims rape young girls, sort of thing, which obviously both is a bullshit answer and is a load of rubbish. But every time I go to speak about sexual exploitation, I know immediately I'm going to get a load of far-right trolls saying to me, oh, well, you didn't care about, and it's just patently not true that I didn't care. I was literally running the sexual exploitation service that had most of those people sent to prison. So the fact that it's not true doesn't make any difference, though. The rhetoric is there that the Labour Party all don't care about that, and they will just lean on it and lean on it and lean on it. But unfortunately, it's things like that that mean that people knock on my door and try and hurt me. It's because they've read stuff like that, and the facts don't matter. I wrote about in the book about how I went to meet a man who tried to attack me, and I explained to him, I presented him with the actual facts of the case, and that being one of the examples. He said, you don't care when white working class girls are sexually exploited by Asian men. And I just gave him all of, chapters. I mean, I literally wrote a book about one of the people who was one of the whistleblowers. It's a great comeback to actually say I literally wrote the book about this. And I ran all the services, and I fought for the government to fund it, and I continue to do that. And he was like, well, I had no idea about that. And that's why it's dangerous. The trolling thing, just ignore it, it's okay, but you know, it sets in a truth. It makes people believe it, and some of those people may then use that to cause you harm.
Absolutely. Jill, did you want to come in here?
Hi, yes, please. Hi, Jess. One of the things I really love about your book, in fact, what I love about all your writing, is that you can see how being in politics fits into life. And it's really refreshing to be able to hear somebody talk like that, because it's something I ask about a lot, and I tend to get kind of fudged answers about how you know, how it looks in life. So we were talking about treating things with reverence before. I just wondered about your kids really, and what kind of reverence they treat this job with. I suspect I might know the answer, but I'm just
literally zero reverence.
Yeah, well, one of my favourite bits in the book is that like you ring them sort of midweek and they just like can't really be asked to answer, which I can just imagine my kids doing. So yeah, I just wondered kind of what they thought about what you do.
It's funny, they are changeable. They you know, on the face of it, and 99% of the time they don't give a toss one way or another. They are like, oh, I think there's a mixture of irritation with people talking to them about me at school and in public, and like, oh, you know, having, you know, people looking me up and things on in like ICT lessons or I mean, I think they have computers in every lesson. We only had computers in IT lessons when I was a kid. So in my head, they're in constant ICT lessons. They, you know, sometimes they're like, they will complain to me and say that it's horrible and they don't like it. And other times, I know that they lean into it. They like it. I remember, I think it was the 2017 general election. I remember my son, my oldest son, saying to me, this is heartbreaking. He said, what if you lose the election, we'll stop being special as a family? And so, you know, to him, it did mean something like, you know, there's something special about us. There's something interesting about us. And what will be the interesting thing about us if you're not a member of parliament anymore? He wouldn't, I don't think he'd say that now. They enjoy the benefits of it. They enjoy being able to live in two places. They enjoy that. And they're not worried anymore about the deficits so much of me being away from them. But mainly because they're teenage boys. Even when I'm in the house, they don't talk to me. You can see that they are proud of it at times. But on reflection, they will be so, you know, I know that when they're adults, when I think about the things that my mum did, and I didn't think it was anything special at the time. I thought, like, stop going on about it. I think that, you know, on reflection, they will feel incredibly pleased and proud that they lived this life with me. But at the moment, they just think, you know, the death threats and things affect them in a way that that don't show at the time. They're very, very stoic at the time of incidents happening, and they, you know, they do that thing that most humans do, is they cope in order to help you out. But then in the aftermath of it, they will tell me, and this might just be a teenage boy thing, like my son said to me, I just felt really lonely during the lockdown, and the first lockdown, but I'm fine now. And I thought, you're telling me a year later? You could have just mentioned it to me at the time. Like, you know, I get the information a year after the fact. But they cope with it at the time, and they're fine about it at the time. But then afterwards, I remember on one occasion, my youngest, watching him in a crowded room, and he behaved in a manner, he behaved like a child in refuge would. He was like hyper, like he's just hyper aware of everything that is happening, and he will scrutinize like where the exits are to look for how we can get out and things. And I remember just noticing that in him once, but he'd never once complained to me. He'd never shown any sign of being upset about any of it. But that, you know, they wear it in their skin, they wear it in their flesh quite a lot of the time, but they've just learned to cope with it, I suppose, the downsides, and they really, really, really like the upsides. They get to go to like Glastonbury and things, and they're like, it's so cool.
Jill, did you want to say anything else?
No, that's great. And say it's just something I wonder about. Say, as everybody, I've got a life to live alongside getting into politics, which I very much want to do. So it's just interesting hearing that side of it, because you don't very often. And I like to I just wanted to have a think about you know, what the balance is like with all the bits of me.
Yeah, I mean, my
won't just stem
children,
with your politics.
my children will inevitably complain about me being in politics when they're in trouble. So, like, you know, I'll be shouting at them about something and they'll be like, oh, well, it's easy for you to say, you don't know how hard it is that you're away. And I say, you never mentioned this until you're in trouble for something else.
But if they want something. Yeah.
They are manipulative though, aren't they? My husband always says, you basically give birth to, like, basically not a very nice person who is the most ultimately selfish person in the whole world. And every year you have to take a tiny little bit of selfishness off them until you end up with a human who can see somebody other than them in the situation. And my children they're down this scale. There's still a bit of shaming to do sometimes.
Thanks, Jess.
While we're on the subject of mothers, though, Jill, I recommend this to you. Jess has written a booklet called Motherhood with the Pound Project, which is a very little book, and I think I've given it to someone in my office. But Jess talks a lot about the influence of her mum in that book, and that's a really lovely book. I don't know how much you want to talk about your mum now, the last 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Jess,
no, I don't mind talking
really
about my mum.
lovely.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Jess's mum is very inspirational.
Yeah. My mum is inspirational. It's funny because when I wrote my second book, which is all about people who fight powers, which is exactly what my mum did. So my mum, in the 1970s, her mum was given a drug called Iraldin she was given as a woman for a heart condition that she didn't actually have, because obviously they didn't actually test anything on women, and they still don't. So she was given this medication for a broken heart that she didn't actually really have, but the medication dried up her tears, so she was basically blinded. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's basically like having sandpaper on the insides of your eyes if you don't have any tears. And so my nan was basically blinded by this drug, and so my mum basically sought to have the drug banned, which she successfully did with the help of her Member of Parliament, the then Member of Parliament for Birmingham Yardley, which I just absolutely love. That when I read the Hansard things about my mum being said by the Member for Birmingham Yardley, my mum died before I was, long before I was even elected onto the council, in fact. That's really, really heartwarming to think of my mum being talked about in the place where I am standing. So they managed to get the drug banned and stopped in use, but my mum was not satisfied with that. So she basically she set up a campaign group to find all the victims, not just my nan. And this is in the 1970s. My mum, when she started the campaign, was 25 years old. She had 2 children under the age of 2. She was living, there was no internet, there was no going out saying, has anyone taken Iraldin? So she travelled around the country putting things in newspapers and found all of the victims. And by the time the compensation closed in 1982, just after I was born, so all the way through this, my mum had 2 more babies. My mum was my nan, who she was defending, was a dinner lady. My mum was the daughter of a dinner lady born in a council house, and for 10 years she fought this campaign. And by the time the compensation closed, they found hundreds of people, and ICI, the biggest drug company in the country, had paid out something like £8.1 million in 1981. That was a shed ton of money. Well, still a shed ton of money now. In fact, this sapphire in this ring here was left in a will to my mum by one of the women she'd never met, who my mum had got compensation for her. My mum had never met her, but she was bequeathed it in her will, and it just came to say thank you for what she had done. So my mum was a bit like, and there's like a Panorama episode made about her at the time and stuff, and she was a bit like Erin Brockovich, essentially. And so, but to me, she wasn't. She was just my mum, and she never talked about it. She never, we had a cupboard in our house called the Iraldin cupboard, And I thought that everybody had an heralding cupboard in their house, like an airing cupboard. I thought it was like that, like, you know, it's just a name for a standard sort of cupboard, like, you know, like the airing cupboard or like, you know, the hostess trolley. I just thought it was like the precursor of that piece of furniture. But it was where she kept all the papers for the heralding campaign, and it was before I was born, so I wasn't really cognizant of it. And she never, you know, she never saw any accolade or any, like, she just got on with doing this thing. But I didn't write about it in the book that I wrote about people who take on powers. I didn't write her story into it, and it didn't even cross my mind to, because to me she was just my mom. I was asked to go and speak at an event about my book, and I was given, it was one of these things where you just have to speak for 15 minutes. It's called like 5 by 15. It was at the Hackney Empire, and everybody else had prepared loads, and I just hadn't prepared anything. So I just got up on stage and told the story about my mum. And a very, very famous author was in the audience, and he said, you know, I like to write like a film about your mum. She sounds amazing, sort of thing. And then I thought, well, I'm going to write just a thing that is just to tell the story of my mum, because I hadn't put her in the book, and I don't know why I hadn't really. I just think I just have a different relationship with her to that one. And she managed to do all of that and still be my mum. And just before she died, I was saying to her, I was thinking of maybe running to be on Birmingham City Council, and she said to me, the thing is, Bab, is it won't be hard to shine on Birmingham City Council. Sounds like Westminster was the same.
I think that's one of the things I always say about women, is that there's a lot of extraordinary women around that think they're very ordinary.
Yeah.
And this is what you often see at Labour. Well, I'm sure it's the same with other parties at selections. Is you hear a lot of men talking about things they've done of great achievements.
Yeah.
And you speak to some women and they say, "Well, I haven't really done anything," and you think, "But you did all those things," and they say, "That's not a big deal, is it?"
Yeah, totally. Like, we don't big ourselves up at all. We're like, oh yeah, no, I did this little thing that, like, you know, changed the law. Like, oh, that's quite impressive, really.
Right, we've just got a couple of minutes because Jess needs to go and vote in a second. Does anyone want to quickly speak at the end before we finish?
I'm going to ask a quick question because I'd be an idiot not to ask you. So obviously sexual assault in pubs is a big problem, and the Ask for Angela campaign is coming back, which I think is completely wrong, because it puts the emphasis on the woman having to leave rather than me kicking out the perpetrator, which I should be doing. And obviously I do and have done on several occasions. So how do we actually solve that problem? How can we get a campaign set up that actually works?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to, without question, we need to root women's experience of violence in men's behaviour, without question. And that is starting to come down the line a lot more now, actually, I would say, is that even calling it violence against women and girls, we should call it men's violence against women. And that does, the Sarah Everard murder brought about that, like, you know what, we've done everything we can possibly do now. We walked in the, you know, on the well-lit street, we went the busy route, we didn't wear our hair in a high pony so someone could grab us. We've done everything. We've put trackers on our phones. We've tried to be polite. We've not worn earbuds. We've done it now, and we're still getting raped and abused and murdered and whatever. So your go now. And so there does need to be much more policy intervention about making men own the violence that they perpetrate, and the society that men benefit from that leads to some men perpetrating violence. So I think that we are at that point of the conversation. I suppose the things like the Ask for Angela thing, I think that it was a very weak response by the government, if I'm honest, in the pandemic to do something. It's one of those things, it's like, you know, monkey tennis. Like, just do something, like just come up with something in a meeting. But look, the Ask for Angela thing, it's rooted in the right idea of giving somebody an out without drawing attention to them. But it's still, there is an element where, and in the situation we're in now, there's not really an alternative to that. But it still is sort of like telling women that discretion is required. Like actually, what it should say all over the pub on posters and on the buses, if anyone touches you, fucking scream and shout at them and feel like everybody's going to come in and wade in behind you. But at the moment, that's just simply not the case. Like,
well, unless you come down to Wales,
and
Bruce,
so,
'cause
yeah, I think that
just here.
that is where we need to get to, but we're nowhere near it now. And we need the conversation needs to be moving on from how we support victims to how we stop the violence in the first place, and stop men feeling like pubs are their environment that women have entered. And that is quite a fundamental thing. As somebody who worked in pubs for many years, you know, the sort of locals at the bar will always think that, like, you know, the women who come in are the interlopers, and so we've got to stamp out spaces that are for us, and that aren't just for us, because women stamped out spaces that were just for us, but they had to be women's only spaces. But I quite like men. I want them in my spaces. I just don't want to feel like the spaces where we both are fundamentally more about them.
Brilliant.
I
Okay,
like the club as much as the next fella.
Okay, well, we're going to have to stop now because I say Jess needs to get off the boat. So I'm going to hold up the book once more. Obviously, it's available at all good outlets. Thoroughly
And some
recommend.
bad ones.
Sorry,
And some bad ones. Really bad,
ones.
like, you know, ethically questionable.
I'm assuming it'll be available at conference at the books.
Yeah. I'm doing some signings actually. I think. Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you ever so much, Jess, and thanks to everyone that's come. We will get the video out shortly. So take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.